Welcome to the show. I am your host, Todd Dallas Lamb, and you're listening to On the Clock. On the Clock is a venture with the Strategos Podcast Network, where we feature an array of guests to dive into all things education. We hope you enjoy. Welcome back to On the Clock with Todd Dallas Lamb. I am your host, and today our guest is Shaylia McRae, and you go by Shay. Is that correct, Shay?
I go by Shay McRae.
That's got to be the coolest name in all of education. I'm going to go ahead and deem that to be the facts right now. Your specialty, Shay, is in turnaround. You are based in the Tampa area at Hillsborough School District. Where are you from originally?
So I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and my mother moved back to Tampa, where she is originally from. She was born and raised in Tampa, Florida. And so at the age of 2, we came back to Tampa, and I've been raised really in Tampa. So when people ask where I'm from, I just say Tampa to keep it easy.
Do you make a big deal out of the being from Louisville? Do you make a big deal out of the Kentucky Derby every year?
Well, actually, my father played for Louisville. He played basketball for Louisville back with the Kentucky Colonels when there was an ABA league and an NBA league. And so my family is still there. I'm very close to my aunts and uncles who all still live in Kentucky. So when we talk, we always talk about sports, not necessarily the Derby.
I get it. And then Louisville is a great sports town. I grew up watching Louisville Cardinals play basketball. So what gave you your spark for learning, your love of learning, that led you into a career where you are working with students in focusing on turnaround?
Okay, so I carry with me 100 years of educational legacy in my family, which I bring to work with me every day. My great-great-grandmother was a teacher. Her daughter was a teacher. My grandfather, down this same lineage, was also a teacher and administrator. He opened schools in Hillsborough County. He was the first African-American professor at the University of South Florida. And he started the Upper Bound program, which centered on getting minority kids into a college-going environment after high school. And so during high school, they would have summer internships, a bridge program at USF. And the whole idea was to get them college ready to go off to whatever school they wanted to go to. So he saw over 3,000 students in Hillsborough County go off to finish 4-year degrees. My mother was an educator at USF, and I am now an educator. So I have a very long legacy of educators, all centered around helping minority youth really excel and get into higher learning. And so for me, being in the school system, that comes from my grandfather and being raised with him here in Tampa. It was instilled in me that whole educational focus and this being a priority for life.
So that's an incredible lineage of educators. That's amazing. So no wonder you're in the business you're in. Tell me about, and our listeners, about what is a turnaround school? How is it designated? And what are I'm guessing the state has certain rules that make you list and grade the schools within your district. Some of them are turnaround, and that's where you come in.
Yep. So in Hillsborough County, we've identified 28 schools to be a part of our transformation network. And we call our transformation schools that are a D or an F school. When a school becomes a D for the first year, they're really under district managed turnaround. And so the state does not intervene. They give the district that first year a chance to try to get that school back into a positive academic standing. But when you get to that second D, that's when the state intervenes and we become partners in the work. And so there's a state team that's on the ground working with us to try to help us kind of boost the academic achievement at the school. And if we have schools that get to a third year D, that's when we begin to contract out. The state has guidance now as statute that we can contract out to get what's called an external operator to work with us. So right now in Hillsborough, we do have 8 schools that are at that external operator status. The remaining 20 schools are either a first year D or a second year D. And this is our first year kind of coming together as a transformation network under our new leadership. But prior to this year, we did have achievement schools, which focused on 50 low performing schools. And we included our C schools in that in that category, those fragile C's, because we know that those fragile C's still need support. So be enough schools for transformation.
What are some of the indicators? I would assume it's graduation rate, it's attendance is probably a part of it, as well as just assessment. What else do they look for to make those designations to D to F?
Well, actually, in the state of Florida, they only look at their state assessment scores. So our school grade is comprised solely of our end of year, our summative assessment. So we have our FSA, our Florida Standards Assessment, and that is how they determine how the school is going to be graded. So it's looking at reading proficiency and gains. It's looking at math proficiency and gains. In elementary school, it looks at science. And then when you get to middle and high school, we look at accelerator points as well as algebra, some of those EOC, civics EOC. And so our school grade is comprised 100% from assessment scores from our summative end of year assessment.
So if my football team is doing badly for 3 or 4 years straight, they just change the coach, right? Yeah. Is that part of the solution on turnaround, is finding new leadership?
That is part of it, is that you have to really think about, do we have the right leader on the bus, and do we have effective leaders in the seat? And so, yes, once you get to a couple of years of a D, we do look at changing the leader before we get to that third D, because that is one of our transformation, network way of work, is having effective, strong leaders in our school.
I went to school in Northern California near an Indian reservation, and had lots of friends that went to school with me of all racial backgrounds. The one thing that I would notice, is that some kids have parents that are in their ear about education, and some have parents that don't really value education. You don't have the ability to just sit back and hope for one or the other. You have to teach every single child. Yeah. I mean, that really is the challenge of a modern school, isn't it? Is to figure out a way to find the spark that you had growing up from your parents and your grandfather, but right. may have to be at the school level.
Right. So what we always tell, our teachers who sometimes get frustrated with the lack of, engagement or involvement, we always tell our teachers that our parents send their best kids to school, right? They're not keeping the good ones at home and sending the bad ones to school. Yep. They are sending their precious cargo to school. And so it really is our responsibility to make sure that we reach that kid and try to instill some spark in that child. But one other indicator in our transformation network that we're really focused on is family and community engagement. And so when we think about school leadership, and we think about, a district as a whole, a lot of time is spent on academics and instruction, and sometimes what's missing is that family and community partnership. So this year, we've been highly focused on family and community engagement, so much so that we have 48 major partnerships to the tune of Microsoft, who's been partnering with us for STEM Academy and academic academies. We have all types of faith-based organizations that's been supporting us with our food desert happening because of COVID. So we have established partnerships that are reaching down to the family and reaching down to the community to try to get some type of, engagement with parents. And so that is a part that I think sometimes is missing and is critical to having in our transformation network.
When I think about American schools, I think about all the ways that you can reach a kid. How do you try to inject new programs that allow students those opportunities that might make that spark happen?
So, with our kids, because we find that kids are not exposed to many of the things that maybe we may see in our upper, socioeconomic areas. I will tell you, we had a partnership with Women of Color Golf. It's a subsidiary of PGA. We got a $25,000 scholarship to reach one of our lowest performing school in the county. And we had Women of Color Golf was established this year. And so we had our 5th grade girls have an opportunity to get out on the golf range with some semi-pro and pro women of color golfers who really wrapped their arms around kids this year. And so that was something that they would have never thought, okay, golf, I want to do golf. Who's thinking about that, right? In an impoverished community. So we are really trying to push in opportunities for kids to be exposed to things that they may not normally have been exposed to. Mentorship programs have been huge for us as well. And so we are pushing in with mentors. We have We See You mentoring, where we are working with PricewaterhouseCoopers and Lauren Dungy, who is the wife of Tony Dungy, and they're pushing into schools with mentorship programs. And so again, giving them exposure to professionals and adults adults that are really pouring in care and love for them. Again, not just all academics, but how are you and who are you and how can I help you be a better kid? So those are some outreach things that we've been doing this year that have been very promising for our students.
So the Dungies are pretty incredible people in that area. I know that Tony Dungy is one of the most motivational people I've ever met. You're telling me that his wife has the same abilities?
Oh, she has the same energy and drive. And, they both actually spend a considerable amount of time in Hillsborough County, not just in transformation, but across our county. They go out, they have a reading program. They go out and they sit with elementary students and they actually read to kids. And so they have a full year schedule where they make appointments with schools, they come in, and kids have the opportunity to sit and listen to, Tony Dungy and Lauren Dungy, and they read to kids. They've actually written some children's books, and they've given signed children's books to kids. They are totally engaged in the educational environment here in Tampa, and we're very blessed and thankful to have them.
You mentioned those fifth grade girls. That's kind of the key number, isn't it? With regards to students, if they haven't figured out how to read and write by fifth grade, it gets really hard, doesn't it, to turn that around?
It really does. Actually, in the state of Florida, third grade is our indicator for reading. And so if students are not proficient on our summative assessment by third grade, that is where we look at retention. We look at some remediation opportunities. We look at possible ways to accelerate to kind of fill the gaps from behind. But in the state of Florida, third grade is where our indicator and mark is to kind of evaluate whether or not students can read, whether they're missing foundational skills, comprehension skills. We really get down into that third grade level. Because you're right, when we get to fifth grade and we're on to middle school, it becomes very difficult. And that's when you get that disengaged child who is frustrated because they don't understand the work. They don't understand, right, the material. And so they begin to act out. And that behavior a lot of times is not because we have air quote bad kids. It's because we have some undiagnosed things that are going on, possibly reading deficiencies where kids are struggling and they don't want their peers to know that they're struggling. So they act out, right? Because it's easier to be sent home and not have to deal with it than to be in school and to struggle in front of your friends.
Well, it's amazing. The school system really is in many ways very similar to the way it was invented 100 years ago, which it's on that agricultural calendar, right? Mm-hmm. But the assumptions are different now. The assumptions used to be for a young person to come in, they had some sense of how reading took place. They'd been read to. They had two parents in their ear all the time about going to school and getting it done and learning. And the classrooms were really small, right? There was like 7 or 8 students to a teacher. And now you have kids coming in who've never been read to, who are expected. And I think the movement toward pre-K really does make a lot of sense to me. Doesn't it to you?
Absolutely. And we've expanded our pre-K programs. I have to tell you, in the state of Florida, kindergarten standards, by the end of kindergarten, there's an expectation that students are able to write a sentence and that they're also able to read on their own, right? So when we grew up, it was like shapes, numbers, colors. Yeah, you're good for first grade. Now it's like you have to know how to write. And we see writing samples in the hallways as we're walking the hallways. You have to know how to read by the end of kindergarten. So we are recognizing only about 50% of our kids are coming in kindergarten ready. We give a kindergarten readiness assessment at the beginning of kindergarten, and only about 50% of those kids are ready. And so if we don't reach down into that VPK pre-kindergarten age range and really boost up what we're doing there, we're going to always be behind track, and it's going to always have implications by the time they get to third grade. So we are really beefing up our partnerships with the Children's Board, with the Early Learning Coalition. We are building pre-K programs into our elementary schools to try to get kids in earlier because we recognize that if we don't start there, how are we ever going to get to really understanding and calculating graduation rate, if you will, right? So we're getting that whole pre-K to graduation and post is really, we're looking at that whole line.
You mentioned that if a school is D and F for a certain period of time, you'll bring in a private management company to manage that. Tell me about that process and who are these companies that do that kind of thing?
So we have companies now that are looking to turn around work. In the state of Florida, we are very pro charter. And so you do have those now educational subsidiaries that are coming out that might be running a private, public-private school or a charter school. And now a spinoff of that is that they don't necessarily want to have a school, but they feel like they have something to offer when they come into schools. And it might be, I have a structure or a system that we think if you follow this structure or system, it'll help you, close the achievement gap. It could be we bring in additional personnel. So we may have additional reading coaches, math coaches, interventionists, right? Or we have this spread of professional development. So you'll find many companies that are really pitching different ways and avenues to try to close the achievement gap in partnership with the district.
I can't even imagine how hard this work must be. Give me something that keeps you coming back in the morning. You must have some successes to talk about.
I absolutely do have successes. As a matter of fact, we are projected right now, of the 8 schools that our external operator 4 are projected to be strong C's. So in 1 year, we started this school year. So in 1 year, 4 of those schools are projected to be strong C's. And so we have other successes in our non-external operator schools where many of them are going to be C's. We have some schools that we're looking at are gonna hit the B mark. And so really what it was about this year is getting the right leader in place, really focused on rigorous, high quality instruction, making sure kids are working on grade level assignments. A lot of times in our transformation schools, we get caught up in that whole remediation phase where the kids are only exposed to prior year or prior year's work. We've got to hit kids where they are and where they're expected to be, and then scaffold, maybe accelerate, what we call accelerate, where we condense and collapse some older standards in partnership with new standards. But we've got to get there. We have some collaborative opportunities for teachers, did a lot of professional development, had some new programming, and all of it is seeming to be successful. Out of state of emergency, what we did different this year, though, and through some funding through ESSA dollars, we did start a Saturday Academy. And so we had 17 sessions across the year of Saturday Academy. And what we found of those 17 sessions, kids that attended 10 or more sessions, we saw had at least 18 percentage point increase in their overall grade versus anybody that was 4 or less. So we are looking at things out of just, we had to do it out of emergency. We're now looking at, okay, what was good about that? How did it work? What did people feel about it? What did parents think? What did teachers think? Is this something we should be looking at coming into this year as we continue to recognize that we have to close the gap from almost what we consider, a year's loss of learning, depending on the student and educational setting and what have you. So we are really trying to uncover what are some of those things that are now being tested that we're finding results with, that we can move forward in the coming year.
Well, my son complains about missing a free throw, and then I ask him, how many free throws did you practice this week? And it's pretty simple, mathematics, right? Like, right. Go do something more if you want to get better at it. And Saturday school seems like a really logical way to put kids more time on tasks, and yeah. You will see improvement if you just do something, whatever it is you do. If you do more of it, you'll get better at it.
Right. You want to do more, you want to do it the right way. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. So you have so much energy and optimism in your voice. To do what you do, I think you have to be that kind of person. What does Shay McRae do when she's not, what is your passion when you're not focused on turning difficult schools around and making them great again?
So I am totally into all things fashion. Like, I'm into interior design. I'm into fashion. I'm always looking at what's the latest European trend, what's the latest color, what's the latest thing. So when I'm not doing this work, I'm at home online trying to figure out the next purchase.
That is fantastic. And like that should be part of education too, right? Like, we should be finding ways there's a lot of young women, and I would suspect a lot of young men who are into to design and fashion. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are ways to spark that interest and that love of learning that we started out talking about earlier on the show.
You're right. And let me go ahead and make a real-time connection. I was looking at the draft, and we had some dapper guys coming up with their little new suits on and their little European cut. We were talking about that this morning. And so, just finding ways to get the interest of kids, regardless of what that is. And it extends beyond sports, and it might not be books. It may be other things. And so you're right. We just got to keep going at it and keep trying to get the attention of our kids, because it matters, right? Their education education matters.
It absolutely does. It matters not just for them, but really all of us as a country.
Everyone.
Yep.
Exactly.
It's so true. Well, thank you so much for being on the clock. Shay, you are now off the clock. Right. And finally, can you tell our listeners how they might reach out to you if they have questions or comments? What's a good way to reach you?
So I'm Shaylia McRae, SHAYLIA.McRae, MCRAE at HCPS, Hillsborough County Public Schools.net. They can email me or look me up online. I'm in Hillsborough County. I'm the chief of the Transformation Network, and I'm here. And
you are awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
If you want to learn more about the show, please visit www.strategosgroup.com. Please consider subscribing on your podcast streaming platform so you don't miss out on our next episode. And until next time, I'm Todd Dallas Lamb, signing off.